For Friends of Old Annville on the history of something called the Annville Lime Company. I'm going to be talking about the history of the area where the Quitty Creek Park now exists in Annville. And I'm really two main things. I'm going to be talking about Bachman's Mill. This is a mill that no longer exists. It was right on the Quitty, and the associated Bachman farm, and then the Annville Lime Company. These are sort of the two important parts of the history of that area. And then finally, the fact that it's the Quitty Creek Nature Park. I'm going to come over on this side here. Okay, so the area we're talking about here, this is Annville. The area we're talking about follows the Quitty, and the Quitty Creek Park now extends within this circle, but we're going to be talking just about this area right here where there's a quarry, there are some lime kilns, and there's the site of a mill. Feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask questions. All right, first of all, the site of Bachman's Mill. This was a key structure for about a century. So to orient you now, this is the swing home walking bridge in the Quitty Park. We're in South Annville here. We're looking north to Annville. And this set of white stones here is the site of the original mill. So it was on the north side of the Quitty, and there used to be a stone bridge here that was finally washed away by Agnes.
Owen, were those stones reset? I don't remember them there before that.
Yeah, there used to be a concrete wall here.
Yes.
And then that started leaning toward the creek, and we took it down. And then when they did the stream restoration project, they put in these stones as a.
And are they from the quarry, or were they old limestone from somewhere that was repurposed?
I think they brought them in. I don't know where they got them. They brought them in. The construction company brought them in and put them in there.
You said this was active for about a century. And what years are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, actually, it isn't quite a century. The mill was, as we'll see in a sec, was built in 1831.
Oh.
And
so
then
early 19th century to.
Yeah, it was right. So from 1831 on. Now it eventually was destroyed. We'll talk about that too. But okay, so this there used to be more associated with the mill, more in the way of little historic artifacts than there is now. Sources I used a bunch of monographs from the Lebanon County Historical Society. I also used, Friends of Old Annville has this massive electronic archives. Paul Fulmer's worked on that. But the most valuable thing I had was a subscription to newspapers.com. And I get most of my information searching old newspapers on newspapers.com. So this mill was built in 1831 by Abram Regal, I think is how they pronounce that. Sometimes it's spelled a little bit differently. This is the third Abram Regal. This was actually, the Regal family built 3 mills on the Quitty, only one of which still exists today. The other 2 are gone. This particular mill then was sold to Peter Bachman in 1834, and then it went from Peter to his son to his son. So it just followed the Bachman family, 1834, 1849, 1903. The latter 2 were John Bachmans, John K. and then finally John A. It housed for a few years a harness and strap factory that eventually moved to Lebanon. It housed for a very brief time a laundry, and then the last part of its years it was part of a lime milling operation in that area, in the area right around the Quitty there. Finally, it was destroyed by fire in 1911. Now, there are no known pictures of this mill, but we do know a little bit about it. There's a description after the fire destroyed it. There was a description in the Lebanon Courier. It said it was an old landmark. It was erected a century ago. That wasn't quite right, by the Regal brothers. it was constructed of stone. So we know it was a stone mill. And it had been used as a grist mill for most of its life, but more recently, this Mr. Dietzler's company was that harness and strap company I was talking about. Most recently, it had been used for some other things. Now, since the Regal family built 3 mills, this is the only existing picture of the only existing Regal family built mill. This one they built in 1797. This is on South White Oak Street in Annville. And this was sold to the Kreider family shortly after it was built, to David Kreider.
Looks like it was a postcard.
This was a postcard, yeah. But what you can see here is this is a stone mill. It has an arch here, and the Quitty was diverted by a dam through the arch to run an interior water wheel.
Would you know if that was an undershoot mill or an overshoot?
Undershoot.
It probably an undershoot, yeah, because of the height of the
dam.
because of the height of the Quitty. That mill today is still existing, and it's like a garage. And they filled in that little channel that was underneath. They filled that in, and it diverted the Quitty away from it. The original mill probably had some sort of a water wheel. One of the common type in those days was a very short water wheel made by the Litz company. A lot of the central Pennsylvania mills had something like that. And that, if you're going to use a constructed dam, and at one point there was a dam, but it may not have been with this mill. This mill may have been like the one I just showed you. So the 1875 map shows, this is the mill I just showed you on South White Oak Street. Apparently there was also a sawmill and a turning mill. Neither of those is present today, nor is there any evidence that I know of for their sites. And then this over here, John K. Bachman had a grist mill and a sawmill, and also a lime kiln, which means in 1875 they must have been doing some work with quarrying limestone and then heating it to form lime. So this is John K. Bachman, 1875. The Bachman farm is right over in this area, and that they're using it for lime production. And then in 1882, John K. Bachman died, and his widow put the mill up for rent. Okay, that's not a picture of the mill, it's just a generic picture of a mill. But and then she died in 1897. She was survived by 2 daughters and her son, John A. Bachman, who then took over. And it says here, it will be remembered that until recently, Mrs. Bachman resided on the old Bachman farm east of Annville, which is one of the most historic spots in Lebanon County. So at that point, 1897, they considered it to be a very historic area. And the mill, I think, had a lot to do with that. And a little bit more about this John A. Bachman from the notes of Doris Flory, who was a local Annville historian. And she dug up a lot of information, and this is from her notes. In 1900, August of 1900, John A. Bachman leased stone crushing equipment. In 1901, a year later, he shipped a carload of crushed limestone to Mexico, of all places. So they must have been selling this.
In 1900 to Mexico.
Yeah. And then the other thing that happened in 1901 is J.A. Dietzler, sometimes spelled D-E-I, met with John Bachman and actually arranged to have his harness and strap leather working company set up in the old stone mill. That didn't last long though. In 1903, we got a little notice in the Lebanon Courier that 2 people were leasing the mill to set up a laundry, and the mill had recently vacated by John Dietzler Harness Company. So there was a period there from about 1901 to maybe 1904 where it was housing small businesses, the mill itself. is 1907, this front page article, this horrific accident that occurred at the in the vicinity of the mill there in Annville. So John Zellers, who evidently his family was desperately poor, he worked in the quarry, and he placed 3 sticks of dynamite in the cook stove in the kitchen to thaw it.
To dry it out.
Yeah. Now, normally, almost always, these quarrymen would put it in a stove outside the house and eat it. And it rarely exploded. But in this particular case, something was wrong with the outside furnace, so he took a little shortcut. And then it killed his wife, and I don't know, the children, it may have killed them too, because the earlier thing said they were expected not to live. But it does talk a little bit about what was there on site. A big crusher is maintained in the stone house near the lime kiln known as Bachman's Mill, and it is within a few hundred feet that the Zeller home is located. So, and then it goes on to say that it's a brick home. It's a brick and frame home, the Zeller home. So this was a terrible accident. It really hit the news in the area. But that tells us that in 1907, John Bachman, owner and operator of the farm and stone quarry, who also lives on the premises in a pretty house not far from the wrecked house. So there were 2 homes near the mill, and John Bachman, the owner of the farm, is now also the owner and operator of a quarry. So that's 1907. Then in 1908, just a little note about a legal claim against John Dietzler and David Rebstock, trading as the Annville Lime Company. That's the first mention in any of the newspapers of anything called an Annville Lime Company. But it's mentioned in 1908.
Oh, look who the attorney is, Charles V. Henry.
Yeah. And in 1911, there was a big fire that destroyed Bachman's Mill. Fire of an incendiary, an arsonist, levels the place east of Annville. And a little bit more on this. Caused the total destruction of the large stone mill owned by John Bachman. The building owned by Mr. Bachman is partly covered by insurance, as is also the machinery owned by the Annville Lime Company. So the Annville Lime Company now was running the operation, of which John Dietzler is the head. The stone mill is said to have been one of the most modern in these parts, and recently it had a large amount of machinery used for grinding and crushing stones. Okay. At this plant, lime was ground to hydrated form and sent to all parts of the state to be used in making cement. So that was their big business. They were producing lime for cement.
And it was hydrated.
Hydrated lime, yeah. Now, what I'm going to do is take a little, since we're talking about it here, we're going to take a little diversion from the history and look at making lime from limestone.
The professor is coming out.
Thank you for your question there. So the three main things you need to make lime is you need a quarry where you have access to limestone, which is calcium carbonate. And limestone is sort of a grayish, light to dark grayish color. Now, to make lime, or quicklime as it's called, you have to put it you have to heat it at 1800 degrees for about a week. And that drives off carbon dioxide from the limestone. And the rock loses about half of its mass and goes to a more brittle, pure white calcium oxide, which is quite brittle, and it can be crushed and cracked into a powder. Okay, and that's done in a kiln, in a lime kiln. And there used to be these kilns all over the place on many farms. Farmers would either get, quarry some limestone on their property or get some somewhere else. They'd heat it and they'd make their own lime. And then they'd spread it on their fields. But the Annville Lime Company was interested in making this slaked or hydrated lime for sale for concrete. So they needed a quarry, they needed kilns, then they needed a big system for crushing and grinding the lime. And adding water. And then they got slaked lime, which is calcium hydroxide. And then they would grind this fine into a powder and it looked like flour. And they called it lime flour in some of the newspaper articles. Cement production, starting from the beginning, cement production is very intensive in releasing CO2. Yeah. This shows the lime kilns that were down at the Quittapahilla Park and are still there. And I'll show you a better picture in a second, but there was an original kiln, a very large one, and then there were 4 more added later, so a total of 5. A better picture is shown here. And you can see this first one was nicely built, this original one with a beautiful arch. And the limestone would be added from the top. Horse-drawn carts would come up from the quarry in back of this, and they'd drop the stone down in, and then the fires would be built below, and the heat would percolate up and heat the lime. And they'd keep the fires going for about a week.
So it looks like a 1950s photo by the car.
This particular one was taken right near the end of the operation of these lime kilns. In fact, they may not be operating anymore. If you notice that's all missing now. After Agnes, and I'm told this by Stumpy Graham, that after Agnes, this was damaged, and they just took in dirt and filled it in.
Oh, so it's still there.
Still there, under the dirt. Now, it was built into the hill on the other side, so there's already dirt on the other side. And now they pushed in dirt on this side. So they didn't want, and they didn't want kids falling off that vertical drop there. So if you go up to the top, anyway, this is what it looks like today from at the entrance. The only evidence you can see at all is just there's a couple bits of a limestone wall. This is where that big first one was. But if you go up top, then you can actually see the kilns, the tops of the kilns. And they go down about 4 feet or so. They were filled in. So all of these, this is the big one, and then this is the last of the 4 other ones. And they're all there, and the trail takes you by all 5 of them. So this is the entrance to the park right in here, where there's a sign here that says Quittapahilla Creek Nature Park. It's a parking lot. You can see we're up pretty high here. It didn't look like it in that other picture when you looked at the hill, but when you actually get up there and look down, it's
That's right.
everything burned in that fire. And the interior of the stone mill was all big timbers and lumber. That all burned. Some of the walls collapsed. They took it all down. And 4 days later, John Ditzler then announces that he's going to build a fireproof structure out at Bachman's. So he's going to replace that mill with a fire. Okay, the place was burned to the ground on Sunday, was set afire as thought by tramps. So, well, actually, he lost all that brand new equipment, and it was only partially covered by insurance. He built this new concrete plant. And this one now, this wall, vertical wall, goes straight down to the Quittapahilla, the edge of the Quittapahilla. And then in this little addition here are metal turbines that replaced a wooden water wheel. And so they are turning in a 90-degree opposite direction. And this is the old arched bridge across the Quittapahilla there, which is now, this is where the swing home walking bridge is now, right here. It's almost right on top of that old original bridge. And this may be the Zeller home where the dynamite exploded. You can see it's quite close to the concrete plant.
Owen.
Now Bruce Baumberger, who lived in South Annville as a kid in the 60s, said, I can barely remember the hulk or form of this mill, that one I just showed you. Still standing in the 60s before the fire company or arsonists destroyed it. So that second concrete plant was also destroyed. I remember the iron turbines that remained in the masonry raceways for years after the mill was gone. And how the stone arch bridge began to crumble and it was condemned to traffic long before Hurricane Agnes took it away in 1972. So here's just an image of what a metal turbine would look like. So it would have a shaft coming out of it, and then the water coming through would turn it in that direction, whereas the water wheels would turn in that direction. And there were two of these apparently, two turbines. Now here's another picture. There's Ditzler's concrete factory. There's the arch bridge that was swept away by Agnes. You can see a waterfalls here. And so there was a dam built, and when they needed power, then they'd divert the water from the dam through the turbines. When they didn't need it, they just let it run over the dam. So it was a fairly high waterfall. I mean, maybe 3-4 feet, maybe.
So there was a gate there.
There was like a weir, yeah, that was placed in it. And you can see,
I remember that.
you can see that's been removed now, but there used to be a stone wall on the other side that had a slot cut in, so you could drop the weir in. All that was left in 2007, this was before we took some stuff down, this is that wall from the concrete plant. You can't really see it here, but it's running like that. Little observation deck up there used to be. This is the concrete raceway, and there's two of these, one here and one here. These are the seatings for the two turbines. This raceway and the seating for the turbines is all that remains now of that second mill, that concrete plant. Okay, well, after it was rebuilt, the Annville Lime Company started to prosper. They switched over to use gas to heat the lime. They called it burning lime. Lime doesn't really burn, but that's what they called it.
Prior to that, they probably used charcoal or just...
Right, and they used to put in limestone, coke, limestone, coke. And then the fire would work its way up. They'd heat it at the bottom and work its way up. Pretty soon, 1914, they needed a new storage house. They built one up, the first storage house up by the railroad tracks, by the train station. They had their problems with the township. The Board of Township Commissioners had to worry about the blasting out there in the quarry, throwing rocks into neighborhoods, probably your neighborhood.
Probably up in the hill there.
Yeah. This was
1914.
1914.
That there were no homes up there.
Okay, yeah.
Probably not.
Another warehouse in 1915, almost a year and a half later than the previous one, even bigger. So they're really producing and having it right by the tracks, ready to ship out. Here's just a note in 17 of a big shipment going to Long Island. In 1920, they're doing so well, they're making improvements at the hydrating plant. They also installed a large compressor in the quarry to help with the drilling. But John Ditzler, the president, died that year, and his brothers, sons, whatever, the Ditzlers took over the leadership of the Annville Lime Company. So in 1937, aerial view of Annville, you can see the Annville Lime Company. The lime was turning everything white. And we still have a big lime hill in the park, where there's a lot of, white tailings and residue.
And it gets slimy.
See, the impact was visible from the air of that operation. So that was a fairly big operation in Annville, especially in the early to mid 1900s. And this whole area was pretty much denuded of trees and just like a moonscape with all this white dust and white